Welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks so much for joining us. Today, we're going to go to North Korea, where they have rocket launchers, tanks, ballistic missiles, a new long-range hypersonic missile. North Korea has been brandishing its military might for all the world to see.
Well, this grandiose display of power marked the 76th anniversary of the country's ruling Workers' Party. Meanwhile, children and elderly people are facing possible starvation, and 75,000 Christians are locked up in prison camps across the country. George Thomas has the details.
A former North Korean high-ranking intelligence official says the regime of President Kim Jong-un, desperate to make cash, resorted to drug deals, weapon sales and terror in order to maintain his tight grip on the hermit kingdom. Kim Kok-song, breaking his silence for the first time after defecting 7 years ago, telling BBC News that the young 37-year-old dictator is eager to prove himself as a warrior to his people and the world. That warrior-like spirit on display as Kim and his top leaders watched bare-chested North Korean soldiers break through layers of bricks and glass as others performed various unusual martial arts-like routines, marking the 76th anniversary of the ruling Workers' Party. North Korean state media saying the strength of these soldiers was, quote, bestowed upon them by their dear leader, Kim Jong-un. This week, North Korea put on one of its largest displays of military hardware and advanced weapons in decades.
His arsenal is becoming more sophisticated.
Flanked by rocket launchers, tanks, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, including this new long-range hypersonic missile, Kim Jong-un vowed to build an invincible military to counter America.
All of these efforts, trying to accomplish multiple goals with different missile systems.
North Korea tested several nuclear-capable weapons in September that could reach targets in South Korea and Japan, including U.S. military bases there.
The effort there is to, in a conflict or in a near conflict, to give the United States a pause the United States coming to South Korea or Japan's defense.
Meanwhile, North Korea's economy and people continue to suffer. The United Nations warning that children and elderly people now face possible starvation.
This is a regime that does not care about the North Korean people. If they did, they would not waste money and resources on these weapon systems.
All this as the regime continues to torture and imprison people of faith.
Those charged with Christianity often face summary executions or are forced to live out the rest of their lives inside political prisoner camps.
A new report details how North Korea's secret police are often rewarded when they arrest Christians.
One victim, who was arrested for the possession of a Bible, was detained in solitary confinement, starved, and beaten with a metal rod used for cleaning rifles.
According to Open Doors, North Korea is the most dangerous place in the world to be a Christian. Some 75,000 North Korean Christians are reportedly languishing in prison camps across the country. George Thomas, CBN News.
Well, we used to call it the axis of evil, and you look at North Korea, you look at Iran, you look at these hotspots, military dictatorships, these attempts to amp up their military. What is the threat they're trying to contain? I think it's quite clear South Korea has no intention of invading North Korea. The United States has no intention of invading North Korea. So what's the purpose of this? Well, the purpose is to create a regional military superpower that could threaten Japan, threaten South Korea, and in that process get its own way. But all it's going to do is to lead to continued isolation, continued sanctions, and who pays the price for all of that? Well, the people of North Korea. So my heart goes out to them. They've been through starvation before. It looks like they're going through it again. They've had crop failures. They've had a lot of different troubles. And they have a government that wants to concentrate all the funding into military weapons. Now, as an American, we have to ask ourselves, what's the purpose of these missiles? Well, it's certainly not to celebrate the 4th of July. They're trying to intimidate us. They're trying to put our West Coast under threat of nuclear annihilation. Can we, as a free people, allow that to happen? I think the answer is quite clearly no. But our options are quite few, and absent some kind of military option, which I don't think anybody wants to do, you're talking about annihilating South Korea in any military operation. So we're going to be held hostage. But here's something we as Christians are not hostage to. We have a right to appeal to heaven. Let's do that. Let's ask for a change in North Korea. Let's ask for a reunification of that wonderful country, freedom for people, the ability to have a life, have a hope, have a future. God absolutely wants that for them, so let's pray that He would move. If you're in other news, if you're not vaccinated, you may have to start getting regular tests for COVID in order to work. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. Those tests would be part of President Biden's vaccine mandate for larger private companies, which he says is coming soon. But the president also faces stiff pushback from across the country against the mandate, even as more COVID treatments are coming. CBN's Jennifer Wishon explains.
The good news is COVID cases in the U.S. are down nearly 50%. Hospitalizations are down nearly 40%. But new vaccine mandates are coming. And as we head into the winter months, the government is close to recommending more Americans get booster shots.
So we do have a unanimous 19 out of 19 yes votes.
An FDA panel voted unanimously in favor of recommending a third shot for the Moderna vaccine. It would be a half dose given at least 6 months after the second shot to seniors and Americans at high risk. The full FDA still has to approve it. Many Americans who got the Pfizer vaccine are already getting their booster shots, and the approval process for a Johnson & Johnson booster will soon be underway. The FDA panel stressed there's no evidence it's necessary to open booster shots to everyone, despite the Biden administration's plans to eventually do so. And in the next few weeks, the FDA will determine whether the COVID vaccine is authorized for children ages 5 through 11. The federal government has already purchased enough doses for that age group. Meanwhile, in a brief address after which he again took no questions from reporters, the president announced his private sector vaccine mandate will soon take effect.
The Labor Department is going to soon be issuing an emergency rule for companies with 100 or more employees to implement vaccination requirements among their workforce.
Those employees will have to get the vaccine or submit to regular COVID testing. It's an effort by the government to get shots into the arms of the 66 million Americans who remain unvaccinated.
Let's be clear. Vaccination requirements should not be another issue that divides us.
But the president's already facing pushback. The Republican National Committee has said it will sue over the private sector mandate. Texas Governor Greg Abbott this week signed an executive order he says nullifies the federal mandate for businesses in the Lone Star State. And at least 24 attorneys general have announced they'll sue over the mandate. Also, according to Frontlines Ohio, a group of Ohio clergy representing 100 churches sent a letter to Biden pointing out his promise as president-elect not to issue a vaccine mandate. The group says he's now crossed a line. The people should have the ability to make their own health decisions, the letter reads. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. There's also pushback in Israel against a government measure to fight the spread of COVID. After 9 months of a massive vaccination campaign, Israel is relying on what's called a green pass. It allows people who've been vaccinated better access to public places like indoor restaurants and gyms where green passes are checked, effectively acting like a vaccine passport. Now, that's led to strong protests from many Israelis, and as Chris Mitchell reports, some are even saying democracy is gone.
Prime Minister Naftali Bennett sounded positive as statistics show Israel recovering from its fourth surge of the pandemic.
In the battle against the coronavirus, it seems at this point that we have the upper hand. All parameters show a gradual decrease in morbidity. The confirmed cases are in decline.
Still, Bennett cautioned against relaxing preventative efforts.
Despite the overall positive direction, no one should enter into complacency facing the elusive virus. We're continuing with the campaign with our might, and we're also preparing for the next stage.
That includes a change to Israel's Green Pass. Technical difficulties postponed its launch, but only those who've received a booster or a second dose or have recovered, all less than 6 months ago, will qualify for the pass. Venues such as indoor restaurants, gyms, and university campuses are expected to check each patron's pass and ID. That sent protesters to the streets against the green passes and what they called forced compliance.
We are totally against any forced vaccinations or any forced medications.
Signs in car windows said, "Tomorrow it's you," and democracy is gone.
I've represented Israel across the world. I've gone on college campuses. I fought for Israel, and I'm ashamed today of what Israel is doing.
Israel began offering the Pfizer BioNTech boosters to those over 12, and more than a third of the 9 million citizens have received it, according to the health ministry. From the beginning, medical experts have had mixed reactions to the green passes. Renowned immunologist Dr. Zvi Bentwich of Ben-Gurion University is part of the Emergency Public Council for the corona crisis.
We are not against vaccination, but we are against the usage of a measure that would cause discrimination and enforcement of measures that would impinge on basically on human rights.
Professor David Enoch at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem disagrees.
When done properly, it does not violate human or civil rights. Giving at least a fairly successful vaccination effort, green passport policy is the way to do that.
Having a policy, let's say in restaurants, that everybody will wear a mask and there would be some sort of distancing, but by saying that you cannot enter a place unless you have this passport, that's a different story.
For the most part, Israelis just want life to return to normal, including allowing an unlimited number of tourists back in the country. Until then, even disagreeing medical minds will continue to look for ways to successfully prevent and treat the virus. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Gordon, this debate over mandates pitting public health versus national personal freedoms reminds me a lot of the debate with national security versus privacy.
Well, it is oddly similar. You know, do you have a right to your own computer? Do you have a right to have your emails not collected by the NSA? And, you know, what did we give up in the Patriot Act in an attempt to control terrorism within the United States? It is similar, but when you're talking public health, for all of you that don't want to be vaccinated, there's not really good court precedent for that position. Let's go back 120 years ago. There was a pastor. He objected to getting the smallpox vaccination. Now, smallpox is a completely different disease than COVID. The death rate is a whole lot higher. But he objected on religious grounds that he didn't want that the vaccine. He lost that case, and he lost that case in the Supreme Court. So when the Supreme Court is weighing public health versus individual rights, they tend to come down on public health. So how is this debate going to be phrased and framed at that court? You have to be very careful what fact situation is brought before the court. Right now, what we're dealing with is the federal government saying if you employ more than 100 people, you either have to have them vaccinated or on a regular basis have them tested. So they're trying to stay way back away from individual rights, saying, well, you have the individual right not to be vaccinated as long as you're going to be regularly tested. I don't see a court overturning that. So everyone's being very careful here, but at the end of the day, it's still a very political decision, and we've got some midterms coming up. We've got more elections in our future. Now the issue is, will any of this matter a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now? So stay tuned. We'll obviously give you the latest on all the lawsuits and all the news regarding what are the government mandates, what are they going to require from employers, and what are they going to require from individuals.